Now for a very convincing attacking display in the closed structure arising after white plays d5, this time from Alexander Motylev against David Baramidze from the Bundesliga in 2012. The game began with a Breyer Ruy Lopez, as is so popular at the moment, and without getting into the theory at all, these moves are all very standard. And now a4, c5, d5, c4. So we have our typical closed center with the pawns on e4 and d5 against pawns on d6 and e5. And in such a center, white often tries to put his pawn on g4. Here, Motylev isn't really geared up for that because the knight's already on g3, and decides to just use the pieces rather than playing g4, which wouldn't really achieve much here. So it starts with bishop g5, h6, bishop e3. Clearly, if white could play queen d2 before h6, then that bishop would remain unchallenged on g5. But this is a typical kind of sequence: bishop e3, queen c7, queen d2, and now h5, or knight g5, bishop g7. So black is controlling a lot of squares in this position, even on the king side, where you think white would have the natural attacking advantages. The black pawn chain controls a lot of important squares, and both knights are ready to defend. The bishop is well placed from a defensive point of view, so white is going to take a lot to try to break through on the king side. And it's instructive how Motylev goes about it, because one of the advantages of having a space advantage, and white does have an undisputed central space advantage here, is the ability to switch play very quickly from one flank to the other. So what we'll see Motylev doing is building up for a queenside breakthrough, menacing a queenside breakthrough, and when black tries to deal with that, then switching back very quickly to the king side. And overall, I found this game just really quite masterful, especially in a position like this, which I think is one of the most strategically complex positions which arises regularly these days. Okay, so he starts with queen e2, knight c5, and now rook a3. So this is a typical Ruy Lopez idea to double the rooks behind the a pawn, so before you open the a file, in order to threaten to take on b5 and perhaps win control of the a file. So this is a classic idea. Black played knight fd7, so already we're seeing that black is anticipating that the battle is going to take place on the queen side, and he's moving his pieces over there to deal with that. And now with rook f1, white slightly switches direction, so this introduces a very important pawn break into the position with f4. Now f4 is a move which you need to be extremely careful when playing a move like this, because black is going to take the pawn. There are going to be very few situations in which black views it as acceptable to allow the white pawn to advance to f5 and undermine this entire kingside construction. So he's going to take, and then the arising position, the assessment of that position is really going to depend a lot on, for instance, whether black can occupy e5 with the knight, because after f4, if you take on f4, suddenly the e5 square becomes an outpost, and a black knight can occupy it. So f4 is something which Motylev is introducing into the position, but he's in no rush to actually execute it. Rook e7, I think, is a good multi-purpose move, or certainly a move which defends the f7 pawn, but one of the problems with the rook on e7 is that now the rooks aren't coordinated, so black is more vulnerable to this rook fa1 idea, and indeed now black came back, so effectively white's won a tempo with his little maneuver. Knight f1 just reroutes this knight to d2, where again in the structure arising after white plays f4, the knight on d2 could be better placed than the one on g3. For instance, if it can come to f3 to contest the e5 square. So Modelev's making a call about where his knight is best placed. And this position, it's quite hard to really criticize Baramidze's moves here, I think, because you would think that he should maybe try to get something going on the queen side, but the problem is that any move he makes on the queen side, such as taking on a4, is going to leave him with a pretty significant weakness on c4. And in addition, white is well placed on the queen side with his doubled rooks there. But again, looking at this setup, you would think that white is aiming to play on the queen side. But in fact, after bishop f6, Modelev plays g4 and decides to open the play on the king side. After takes, plays queen takes g4. And this position, if you look at it with a computer, you'll find that computers think that this is equal, but they really miss quite a lot of white's tactical resources. And actually, I think that this position is reasonably difficult for black, because white does have, he retains his queenside pressure, but also on the king side he's amassing quite a considerable force. Once he plays f4 as well, this bishop can be liberated very quickly by e5. So this is not a pleasant position for black to play. Excuse me. Black played king g7 to shore up the king side. Now takes, rook takes a8, and now f4. So we see that at the moment when a black knight is relatively far away from the e5 square, Modelev decides to strike. So takes, bishop takes f4. Knight b6, rook f1, and now this is really quite a serious kingside attack. I haven't found anything which is completely convincing for black here. The line which I tried to make work was knight bd7 to try to bring this knight into e5, but now white has a tactical shot which no doubt Modelev had seen, as had Baramidze. Takes an e5, and suddenly the queen and the bishop attack the g6 pawn. The f file is completely open. It's got a black king at the end of it, so this isn't looking so healthy. Baramidze decided to try to trade this powerful bishop on c2, but now after takes and queen h4, the position starts obtaining quite forcing characteristics, and black's in a pretty serious amount of trouble here, I think. What Baramidze chose in the game was knight takes d5, so trying to upset the balance somehow. But it's difficult to really come up with a compelling alternative for him. But knight takes d5 effectively is a blunder because it misses that after check, and bishop takes d6, white is breaking through, and checkmate follows. So black resigned here. So a game which I think just speaks of a kind of strategic and tactical mastery. It's no surprise that it took a player of the strength of Alexander Modelev to play a game like this. But one of the takeaways, I think, is that white should be quite willing not to show his cards too early in this closed structure. So menacing play on the queen side, menacing play on the king side, and trying to keep black guessing. I've got no doubt that by the time knight takes d5 was played, Baramidze would have been in horrible time trouble, because defending a position like this, trying to anticipate all of your opponent's resources, is something which is very difficult even for a strong grandmaster to do, as this game demonstrates.